Often these kinds of things that are difficult, suffering, relationships, breakups, illness, take us to a point of like, we're at rock bottom, but at rock bottom is when we can start going up. And at rock bottom, we can start to say, do I love all parts of myself? Because when I first got divorced and my husband left for someone else and all of this happened, I literally was like questioning my own value. Am I worthy of love? Like at the core, right? The question is, am I worthy of love? And the only way we can truly heal, especially in the realm of autoimmunity, is to look at all parts of ourselves and truly and unconditionally love and accept ourselves, just like we do those friends and family that are around us.
Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson, and today we are joined by Dr. Jill Carnahan, your functional medicine expert. She's a double board certified physician and the founder and medical director of Flatiron's Functional Medicine. As a survivor of breast cancer, Crohn's disease, and toxic mold illness, she brings a unique perspective to treating patients. Released in 2023, Dr. Jill's best-selling book, Unexpected: Finding Resilience Through Functional Medicine, Science, and Faith, is a powerful prescriptive memoir that will have you laughing and crying with her on the journey, leaving you with the key resources you need to achieve optimal health and wellness. Dr. Jill's also the executive producer, film writer, and featured in a new documentary that was just released about her journey of overcoming illness, which is called Dr. Patient. In today's conversation, we are talking about the healing power of loving yourself and addressing the emotional root causes of autoimmunity and illness. We share our experience with changing your patterns to change your immune system and how it's an essential part of any successful healing protocol. Dr. Jill, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Julie. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited for this conversation. This is such a gift for listeners. I was just saying before we hit record, that your movie just released, and I think it is one of the most impactful things that anybody in general, but especially anybody already struggling with any kind of chronic illness or autoimmunity, they need to go see Dr. Patient, find it, see it, and we'll get into the book and movie later. For the few listeners that may not know you and be familiar with you, can you share a little bit of your journey? I am guessing when you were a little girl, you were not dreaming that this was your path that you were going to be taking.
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm in central Illinois. I was one of 5 children and really wonderful, loving family and lots of, the classical, what you'd imagine on the farm and that kind of. But unbeknownst to me, that life, that the chemicals on the farm and that was classic in the 80s, 70s, and 80s in the Midwest were kind of slowly poisoning me. And I didn't really understand this until I got to medical school, was pursuing my dream of becoming a doctor. And I noticed a lump in my breast. This was I was actually 24 when I first found the lump. And then by the time I was diagnosed, it was right around my 25th birthday. I went to surgery and got a call from the surgeon that said, Jill, you have aggressive breast cancer. And, I always say we all remember those calls, whether it's a loved one who just passed away suddenly or a diagnosis that's, completely out of the blue or whatever it is. We all have those moments in our lives where things change forever. And I'll never forget like the place I was sitting and the color of the wall and the music that was playing at that moment when I heard, because it was such a this is so surreal. I can't believe I have cancer at 25. And even the diagnosis was kind of like, oh, I have a lump. It's no big deal. I'm 25. 25-year-olds don't get breast cancer. All that to say, I finally got the diagnosis and it was really a turning point. First of all, the shock, because I didn't know. Now I'm 20 years out and I'm surviving and thriving. But at that moment, I didn't know if I had 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years. So it was really shocking and it kind of changed everything. Now, I always went into medicine knowing there was more holistic ways and that food was helpful for medicine and all kinds of principles that I grew up with. But the rubber met the road when I was diagnosed with cancer because I had to decide, what do I do? And
Yeah.
because it was 25, it was so aggressive. I ended up choosing very conventional, aggressive 3-drug chemotherapy, surgery, radiation. But what I did on the side was I had a naturopath and I had pastoral prayer and I had friends that were there and I had all kinds of other things. And I feel like, getting through the cancer was easy. It was kind of the recovery after.
Mm.
And then within 6 months of me totally getting through the cancer, being considered in remission, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which was another kind of shock. And now in hindsight, it makes perfect sense because the chemo caused more permeability of the gut. I already had a genetic predisposition towards autoimmune on the gut lining, like Crohn's. And then that, caused me to develop Crohn's. And so then I delved into the idea of what does the gut have to do with disease? Can we cure disease through diet? And through that journey, I completely am free of both Crohn's and cancer, but it was kind of a
Woohoo!
right? It was kind of a trial by fire for me to learn how to do this with my own health and my own physiology.
And I know even in your journey, you too, like so many, this may be one of my biggest pet peeves. We're told, no, don't worry about what you're eating. There's no connection between Crohn's disease and food, right?
Yeah, that was a real shocker because I'm in third year medical student and I knew that. I mean, I knew food was medicine. I grew up kind of with chiropractor helping and actually one of my first books that I read was about nutrition, but I didn't really know and I'd never really come across Crohn's. And so when I was seeing the gastroenterologist for the first follow-up, I'm asking him questions and he's like, Jill, you're probably going to need lifelong drugs that modulate your immune system. You're going to need steroids. You might need surgery to resect part of your colon. It's likely this is incurable. I mean, it was really, really dismal and hopeless. And as I left, I thought, well, I'm willing to do what I need to do, whatever it takes. And I asked him in all sincerity, Doc, does diet have anything to do with this? Could I change my diet? And he didn't even pause. And he said, Jill, diet has nothing to do with this. But that's where I always tell patients, trust your intuition. I did not know
Yes.
much. I didn't know it here, but my heart was like, that can't be true. How in the world could a gut disease not have anything to do with diet? So I
Right.
kind of, my little stubbornness that was underneath all of this was like, I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to figure this out. And I started researching, and lo and behold, I did find out some dietary changes. And I was within 2 weeks of changing my diet. The fevers were gone, some of the symptoms were gone. I wasn't cured, but I was significantly better.
Right. Which is amazing. And I love that, we're not talking about a year ago. This was a while ago.
20 years ago. Yeah.
Not that you haven't had a continuously eventful wellness journey. I lived for years not too far from where you lived, and so nobody that I knew at the time would have been aware that even if you weren't living in a flood zone, the area around Boulder, Colorado can flood. So I know that I want to share. I know we could to just go through your story and so I know you have so much value to give to listeners, but I do want to share also that
Yeah.
caveat of because what I see all the time is there is such an intersection between mold toxicity and autoimmunity. And so, fast forward, so
Yeah.
you heal Crohn's, you're shifting, you're this pioneer in functional medicine. And what happens?
Yes. So I got through the Crohn's and the cancer and really like with my own diving into the gut, I became the gut expert and healed that and did well. And then in 2010, I left my position at a hospital in Peoria and moved to Colorado to start my own practice. And it was so exciting and so terrifying and things were going well. I was actually back to like running marathons and hiking and skiing and just pretty much back to
Living.
normal. Yeah, living life, doing well. 2013, there was a massive flood in Boulder, epidemic proportions that flooded just, hundreds of miles of land and most of the town. And I also didn't think much of it. In fact, I worked that day as the waters were rising. And then about a year later, I started having unique symptoms, shortness of breath, rashes, brain fog, fatigue, congestion, all kinds of symptoms. My immune system was crashing. And at first, my office manager even thought that I had cancer back, but it wasn't cancer. And I finally realized, oh, there might be something in my environment because I always felt worse in the office than I did at home. So I started testing and did some mold urine mycotoxins. And then I also hired an inspector to look at the building, and we found bulk samples of some really nasty black mold in the basement. And in hindsight, it's almost funny to talk about because my office was on the second floor and it was built over an unfinished crawl space that had standing water. The basement had had water damage before, and then the flood just made it worse. And then my office, which was on the second floor above this crawl space, was built. I had a contractor come in and remodel, and it was beautiful. But what he did is he just threw down some beautiful new bamboo flooring over old carpet, which was probably 20 years old. So every step on that soft bamboo was like puffing up this garbage underneath.
It
So now in
makes me
hindsight,
gag every
I
time
know,
I
right?
hear about that part because I think there's such an important takeaway. I mean, here you're walking the walk, living the life, helping people heal. And because so often people are like, well, no, I don't have, like, you think of mold as something you see,
Yes.
right? And you can be so educated and know all the things. And if you don't peel back the layers, you don't find it.
That's exactly. And even then, I mean, I had been doing functional medicine. I was,
Yeah.
teaching and all that, but I didn't understand how much mold was at the root of so many, especially autoimmune diseases, but all
Yes.
complex chronic illness. And it was almost, I always have compassion for patients just finding out because there's a bit of denial and almost 100% of the time because it affects your home or your
Right.
workplace or
Right.
something. And it's really like very intrusive into your safety. Like it affects our core safety messages. Because
Yeah.
if our home is contaminated, then of course where we live is not safe for our bodies. And so there's a
Yeah.
lot of other psychological things around it. But when I finally was like believed it, I remember it being like Christmas Eve or Christmas Day of 2014 where I got the results and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt my urine, my building, they matched. There was an issue. I literally did not set foot again in my office. And I had books and I had all kinds of stuff. I just literally gave it up and started over at that point because my health was so valuable to do that. And this is the other message. It took me about 18 months to really start to move the needle. It's not an easy, like, let's do a month of detox. I
Yeah.
got more sick before I got better. And I had to really, really learn. And also, one of the messages of the book and the movie is that self-compassion. I had to have lots and
Yes.
lots and lots of self-compassion in the journey.
Yeah, which can be so hard. You mentioned even just the kind of external, that psychological process of, do we have to move? Do we have to give up everything? I thought my home is my safe place or my office is my safe place. No, it's not. And add to that some of that signaling and anxiety driving mycotoxins. Like there's just so many layers of alarm bells, that you may not understand why or what's going on.
Yeah.
But anxiety I'm sure you see this all the time. I know intuition is coupled with your vast medical knowledge is one of the things that makes you such an amazing physician. And sometimes listening to somebody initial conversation, like there's an energy that signals. I'm like, let's talk about mold for, I think I know where that's going to fall once all the tests come back and it's going to be high. And so that's a lot, even for a professional to
Julie, I
wade
love that you
through.
mentioned that because I feel like that's so true. And when I was researching for the book, one thing that was shocking and then like, of course, was there is research on limbic activation through the olfactory system. So basically, we inhale a chemical or mold in particular, and it activates our limbic fight and flight kind of trauma response. And this is separate from, say, we're like, oh no, I'm going to lose my home or I'm going to have to fix my home. That's a
Right,
like logical analytical thing. This
right.
bypasses all of that. And literally, there's this chemical effect of a trauma response. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh, no wonder. Because I would say literally 100% of patients, including myself, even if they're emotionally healthy, they have a great support system, they've done therapy, they've done all the work, even if there's still a trauma response to mold. And I think that's what you were alluding to when you sit with a
Yes.
patient. You can kind of sense this underlying, and again, even if they're not an anxious person like I wasn't, I definitely had
Mm-mm.
a bit of anxiety and then a bit of like reclusiveness because I was trying to heal. And I'm normally pretty social, but I couldn't handle stimulation. There's so many factors there, but there is some real factors on the limbic activation that if you don't deal with that piece of it, it's a trauma like anything else.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that, and you talk about that in your book. And again, kind of just right out there for all of us to I just was blown away with just how open and honest and personal you get in the book and in the movie, and in the documentary as well. But I really believe that's the best way to connect with people. And that in and of itself, just even I know remember when I was reading your book when it first came out, and it was like, oh, and I've met you, I've followed you, I know you a bit, and was still like, oh, I went through that. Oh, I can connect on that. Like there is something so healing in sharing our stories, which is why we do the podcast, right? And I know why, in addition to giving the information and the tools and sharing that. And so,
Julie, that is so, I love that you say that because it really reinforces. I remember when I first did the first draft of the book, and one of my editors said, nope, go back to the drawing board. And it was partially done, but it wasn't at that. Same with the documentary. We got this one version. Both of them went through multiple redos to get to that real core. And I had to go to the scary core of sharing things that I felt like were so personal,
yeah.
so intimate, and so like ashamed, maybe shameful, right? Like
Mhm.
whether it's something I suffered with, something I struggled with, or something about the emotional impact of medical education, or I could go on and on. And yeah, I even talk about in the movie this ugly cry scene that I did not want in there at first. And then I was like, oh, that's hard to watch. But you know what?
Oh, and
That's
it was not
where
ugly, by the way.
you're so kind. But the truth is like that, what I kept realizing over and over the
Genuine.
lesson in all of this is like when we go to those points that feel shameful, feel, hard to share, that's where we connect. And my story, whether it's the book or the movie, is every person's story. I am not unique. And what my goal or prayer is in that is as I share those experiences, that someone would see themselves and be encouraged and know they're not alone because
Yeah.
we're all walking this life. And so often we hide those parts of ourselves. So we think that we're the only one suffering with this emotion or this
Right.
struggle. And when we share it, it's like, oh, everybody's struggling with this,
Yeah,
right?
you don't see that on the Instagram reels, right?
Yeah,
Like that's
exactly.
it's not the yeah, and I may be using different words, but it's kind of like the mask that you've had to, you really did take the mask off, and I thank you as somebody who, has been on this planet for 55 years. I've had my own journeys, and
Yes.
again, there's just that is, I believe, the most important piece of healing, and you can do the protocols and be doing the things, the right things, and without the emotional healing, sometimes you don't get the results you're looking for. Often you don't get the results
So
you're looking
true.
for.
It is, and I say more and more the longer I've been doing this, I'm sure like you as well, is I know the protocols and the supplements and all that stuff. It's
Yeah.
wonderful, it's core foundational. But if you don't
Yeah.
do the work on the trauma, if you don't do the work on the self-love and acceptance, and if you don't do the work on relationships, and those are really core just as well as the supplements and protocol.
They are. And I promised we weren't going to be here for 5 hours, even though I have like 5 hours of questions I want to ask you. And so that's the perfect segue into let's dig in a little bit about the healing power of love. Because, when I first asked you to be on the podcast, of course, I was thinking, let's talk about the mold and autoimmune connection. But this is even more important.
Yeah. So what I realized, again, this is all comes from starting with me and my own journey and having to heal from all these things. And I felt like I knew, get from over breast cancer and Crohn's disease and all of that. But after my divorce, which I had been married to the same man for 20 years, never in a million years thought I would go through divorce. And I did. And we both now we're friends. He actually helped produce the movie. So it's a
Saw
beautiful
that.
relationship. Yeah. But in that sense, we had to separate and go to those pieces that were broken parts of ourselves and really love ourselves because and again, often these kinds of things that are difficult, suffering, relationships, breakups, illness, take us to a point of like, we're at rock bottom. But at rock bottom is when we can start going up. And at rock bottom, we can start to say, do I love all parts of myself? Because when I first got divorced and my husband left for someone else and all of this happened, I literally was like questioning my own value. Am I worthy of love? Like at the core, right? The question is, am I worthy of
Yeah.
love? And that's so relevant to autoimmunity because if you look at even Gabor Mate's work, there's this piece of autoimmune that's self-hatred or self-denial or self-repression. So
Mhm.
even if there's parts of yourselves you love, there's probably a part of yourself you hate or disown, or like even a part of your body where like, oh, my belly, I hate this part of myself, or whatever thing it is for you. I know I have my own things. And the only way we can truly heal, especially in the realm of autoimmunity, is to look at all parts of ourselves and truly and unconditionally love and accept ourselves, just like we do those friends and family that are around us. And we can show that same kindness. And I had to literally go back to my 5-year-old self and say, sweetheart, you are worthy of love and you're so brave and you're so strong and I love you and I'm here for you. And we can almost like reparent those parts of ourselves that felt like alone or felt like isolated or felt unworthy. And I grew up in a wonderful family and I had
Right.
trauma, right? Like, and so
We all do. I mean, there's
yeah,
no
we all.
one. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's those pieces of ourselves that either we felt misunderstood or unloved. And even with the movie, there was this underlying theme, BLT, that we used to drive every scene and everything in the movie. And it was believe in yourself, believe that you are able to heal. The L was love yourself and love others. And unconditional love to ourselves is how we start the healing process. And the T was trusting your intuition. So often patients know something's wrong or know that maybe there's something else that they could be doing, just like me with the diet. And they don't trust, well, they trust their intuition until they go to the doctor and the doctor says, there's nothing wrong. It's all in your head. Your labs look fine. And so they start to doubt. It's almost like medical gaslighting. They start to doubt their own truth.
Yeah.
And like, well, maybe he's right. Maybe, or maybe she's right. Maybe there's nothing wrong with me. And they start to doubt. And when we disconnect and have some other authority other than ourself telling us what's true, and we start to believe that more than ourselves, that's when we lose our intuition. And at the heart of healing is reconnecting to our human body and saying, sweetheart, what are you telling me? What I did in medical school was I dissociated from my body so I could survive. I was a highly sensitive young girl, and medical school was brutal. It was
Yes.
abusive. It was a brutal. I could not have survived had I not told my body to shut up and be quiet. I need to get through school and use this. And then I had to, in my 40s, reassociate and say, I am so sorry for all those years I denied you, sweet body, to giving me these signals. And I had to start listening. And a huge portion of my healing came from reconnecting to my soul, my spirit, and my body, and being so kind and compassionate with those signals instead of ignoring them.
Ooh, which is it sounds so easy, right?
Right, right. It's a
No,
continual
I'll take
practice.
I'll take the supplement protocol, thank you. That's so much. It is a continual
It
practice.
is.
And I think one of the things that's so impactful of how you've shared your story um, is it's not that you're saying anything that hasn't ever been said before, right? Like this isn't new information. It's just prioritizing it differently and sharing it in a way, back to the relatable. Um, Sometimes we hear that and we don't know the backstory. And so we get the like, well, easy for you to say, easy for you to say, you're beautiful, you're smart, you're a doctor, you're this, you're that, and so by sharing those parts that were really uncomfortable and difficult to share of your journey, I think that it is the most important part. It really is because as you mentioned, and that's why, the word trauma, everybody has this, some people have a trauma response just to the word
Right.
trauma. It doesn't have to be a big event, it's a big
Right.
T, little t. And I love that you qualify because I know, when people hear reparenting, they think, oh, she must have had to. No,
Yeah.
you have a beautiful family, lots of love. That's
Right.
not it. It's stuff gets in that if we don't like sit back and take stock, because there is that, and it is a very autoimmune, push down, push down.
It is.
Um, I don't know. One day I'm going to find out why we try to kill people who want to be doctors. Like, I don't understand why medical
Oh
school
yeah,
is set
the
up.
training is unbelievably off
Yeah,
and
it's
not at all conducive to compassion or empathy.
no, no. And it's like international. It's not just this country.
Yeah.
Like, that's just how it is. And it's very, always fascinating to me. And so I love that you've taken really conscious steps to heal from that part of your journey and the other parts
It's
as
almost like we have
well.
to heal from medical school, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you know how many physicians I interview that, they're autoimmune or their cancer or their whatever their thing was that, the conventional approach didn't fix all be all. It started in medical school, and it is just because of that, so, I'm sorry, and thank you for for making it through and then teaching us that there's a better way.
Yeah, hopefully things will continue to change.
Uh, Do you have, well, they will, because I know one of your big contributions is that the whole point is to change the system, right? We want to help people, but we also want to change the system. And I think the more you do training physicians and other people, even health coaches, anybody who will listen, I think is those little baby steps toward changing the system. I hope. That's what
Me
I
too.
tell myself. Yeah. So do you have some sage, where does somebody start, right? These are big things, right? Just like remediating mold is a really big thing. This is an even bigger thing to take on, and essential for everybody, for like really why we're supposed to be here, right, on this planet. Um, like, how does somebody listening that's like, I wonder, what am I pushing down? Or, oh, I call it the mean girl voice. You can
Yeah.
just, whatever, we all have one. And I've yet to meet anybody who's like, oh, the things I tell myself are just so nice. That's not. So like, do you have any kind of advice for taking stock of where a good place to start might be?
So I think it's first, kind of like you mentioned, is us actually being aware. Awareness is the start. And awareness, like I said, even in med school, I didn't know during med school. I'll give you an example. There's a scene we talked about the ugly cry in the movie, and I'm back all this stuff in the movie. There's no script. I'm just in real life talking, and I go back to medical school because we're going to film about what happened there. And this is just a couple years ago, so about 20 years after my medical education, I walk into one of the big lecture halls and I start talking to the film person about, wow, this is bringing back a lot of memories. And as I'm talking, I get so choked up because what I see in my vision as I'm talking is I see myself now today in my 40s, and I see back to that 20-something-year-old girl I had just married and inherited three beautiful stepchildren.
Yeah.
I was going to medical school, and then I was diagnosed with cancer. And I look back at her and I'm like, how in the world did she
Yeah.
survive raising three children, getting through medical school, and getting a breast cancer diagnosis that was so traumatic? And I start crying in the film because I'm like so like deeply touched by, oh, sweetheart, you went through so much and you had to suppress so much to get through. And now that I look back, I have clarity. So I think part of it is starting by looking back at our younger self, whether it's 5 or 15 or 25, and trying to perceive what we went through as an adult now that we are more aware, and look back and say, oh, wow, I can't believe either how strong I was to get through that, or how dissociated I was to go through that. And once we become aware of those patterns that again maybe kept us ill, then we can start to change. And that change starts with the conversations. I remember right after my mold related illness, I was so sick and trying to get well. And there was one day I remember understanding I had fought cancer. I had fought Crohn's, and I won both of these battles, but it was all a fight. And as I related to mold related illness in that moment, in that day, I thought, oh my goodness, my immune system is so aggressively fighting the mold that it's damaging my cells and causing issues. And this is so relevant to autoimmune because it's the
Yes.
same thing, attack of self. And
Yeah.
at that moment, I thought, I have to change my story. I can't fight mold or I'm going to kill myself in the battle, right? And I literally made up I remember hearing about a man who had gone through stem cell or transplant, bone marrow transplant. And
Mhm.
the doctor said, we need so many of these cells in your blood. So he started meditating and visualizing on his blood
Mm.
cells to replicate them. And when he got to the doctor and they took the biopsy of the bone marrow, the doc said, how in the world? You're like 10 times the normal amount we get. And he said, well, I've been meditating. And I remember hearing that story. And of course, we know the power of the mind, but I thought, I can change my story of these fighting. So at that moment, I created an image in my mind, a whole movie scene, and it was the minions, these little yellow guys, and they were my immune system in Despicable Me, and they were happily whistling, escorting the mold out, but they were not fighting. And I started meditating every day, and I would say every day in every way, I'm stronger and healthier, wealthier, more resilient, younger and more beautiful. I will overcome all obstacles. I will outlast all adversity. Things are turning in my favor. And then I start meditating on these minions, right? And this whole changing my self-talk, changing my story, it literally transformed my immune system. And I believe with all of my heart that part of that new story, that new meditation, was how I healed my body from mold and from autoimmune.
No doubt. I have no doubt at all. And I laugh because, again, lived outside of Boulder for a really long time, from the East Coast. So the thing, it's not woo-woo. It's science. We know that, change your thoughts, change your life. Like this is real.
Mhm.
And I love that you share that because um, it's so impactful. It really is. And as what I was hearing as you're sharing your personal, statement is I have everybody in the very beginning of our work together create a healing statement. It can evolve and change of
Yes.
like, what does my body need to believe right now? Even if I don't like hear yet in my
Yes.
head,
Yes.
And so I love that because I believe that helps whatever protocol, whatever approach, all the things just work exponentially better and quicker and longer.
Julie, I love that you do that because that's what, when I started realizing the subconscious will act out anything you believe, it's
Yes.
not discriminatory. So if you can program that subconscious with repetition and emotion, it will perform. And I'll tell you the honest truth. When I first came up with that, there's actually verses from a faith perspective that I go
Yeah.
along with each of those things. So there's actually more to it, but that's what I
Well,
would
which
say.
is the more meaning it has
Yes,
to
yes.
you,
For
the
me, it's like
better.
very
Yeah.
personal. Like one of them is, this sickness will not end in death, but it's for the glory of God. So for my faith background, it was like there's a bigger purpose to this. But I
Right.
was going to say, when I first came up with that, stronger and healthier, wealthier and more resilient, younger and more beautiful, there was my own mind going, who are you to say you're more beautiful? That's ridiculous. That's so vain. Who are you to wealthy? But the truth is, I know in my heart, those things are motivation to inspire the world. It's not about me. It's not about ego.
Right.
So I grabbed onto those, but even our own mind can be the one that kind of says, no, you can't have that. And we have to actually reprogram it and change those thoughts. Because when I first came up with, I thought this is ridiculous, and
Of
even sharing it,
course.
right?
But you created the awareness, right?
Yes,
You caught, that's the thing, that voice is in there. And like I said, it's almost never nice,
right, right. The mean girl. Who are you to
it's
be
in
beautiful or
there all the
younger?
time, and,
Yeah.
but we ignore it, but it does, but our cells are still reacting to it,
Yes.
whether we're conscious of it. So I love all change starts with awareness, but that in particular, I love how even in that example, you were like, oh,
Yeah. Let's change the program.
and and the self-compassion that you talked about, I want to highlight for people because I've had people say, well, okay, so my personality gave me autoimmunity or my coping, no, all of these things were survive like the medical school example is perfect. It's a survival tactic. It served you in
Yes.
a way
Yes.
at the time. And I have sometimes tell off the mean voice. Sometimes just say thank you. Doesn't serve me anymore.
I
But
love that you said that though, because dissociation to me, I'm going to tell you another example. So that again, in med school, I survived, and then I had to undissociate,
right.
reassociate to get well. But just the other day, I had an MRI for I can't remember, wrist or knee or something. And
It's like
when
I
I
don't
got
know. I'm
whatever thing that
busy.
was,
I'm
yeah.
active.
And in that MRI, as you know, if you've ever had an MRI, it's loud, it's obnoxious, it's kind of scary because you're really close to the thing right above your head. And so when I get an MRI, I dissociate into a beautiful beach, and I can actually
Yes.
logically, almost like a lucid dream, I can use that skill of dissociation in that circumstance, and it's perfect and it's
I love that.
appropriate. And I can get over it
Yes.
without any. So we can actually use this in difficult circumstances to actually help. It's just if we overuse it or over identify with it, we have to be able to understand that it's not always helpful.
Right. And when it's the pattern, I love that's a new appropriate
Yeah,
disassociation.
right?
I
I
love
know. It's
that.
like appropriate.
It's a tool if
Yeah,
you're using it as a tool. If
yeah,
you're living in it,
right.
that's
Exactly.
a whole different story. So
Yeah.
I hope the MRI results were great
All
and
good.
all
Yeah.
your parts are working well. For those of you that don't know, Dr. Jill is quite the adventurer. So not only physically active, but mountain climbs and skis and rides her motorcycle and just has lots of fun and enjoys life.
I do. The funny story, I have to tell you really quick. This will take 30 seconds. So in February, I was long day at work. I got home and I thought, I just want to do something fun. I put on my roller skates, which light up and have pom-poms. They're great. And I have a condo, so I rolled down the hall. It's concrete carpeted to take out the garbage. Well, I
Love it.
fell and broke my wrist.
Oh
And
no.
you wouldn't, it was all, but I mean, it's all good. It was actually a divine lesson in there too. But the bottom line was at the ER and everywhere else I went, what happened, right? Is what people want to know. Well, I was
Uh-huh.
the garbage roller skating and everybody loved the story. So, yeah.
And you might, I mean, the beauty is when we get hurt doing something that we love, it's a whole different
Yes.
thing,
I totally agree.
The
Even looking down, the moment I looked down, like, oh, it's broken. It's like, okay, God, I need to slow down. I hear you. And but
yep.
there was almost a joy. It wasn't fun, right? But it was like a
No.
joyful, like, oh well, at least I did it roller skating.
Right, exactly. Exactly. All of my horse injuries, at least they were horse
Yes,
injuries. Like I was
exactly.
doing what I loved and either, and then the lesson, right? Wasn't paying
Yes,
attention,
yes.
wasn't whatever, didn't listen to my intuition. That was when I broke my shoulder. So
Oh,
yeah, we always are getting reminders if we need them, for sure, for sure. Oh, so amazing. I want listeners first to know, because I keep referencing the book, and I gave the title of the documentary, but not the book. So if you have not already picked up Unexpected, it is, and I read a lot of books. I know a lot of wonderful people who write amazing books. This is an absolute must read. Um, for wherever you are in your healing journey, I think it doesn't matter. And for whatever faith you come from, it doesn't matter. It's such an amazing and ironic kind of it's a surprise. Like the book really surprised me. Shouldn't have. The title is Unexpected, right? So but it did. I just was thinking, oh, she wrote, all about how to heal from mold, or no, it's really it's a guidebook, I think, to living your best life. It's really not even about physical health. It's just living your best life. So um
oh.
yeah, that's amazing.
Julie, that's profound. And I've had lots of interviews about that, but that's one of the most kind and beautiful things anyone's ever said. Like I resonate with that. And thank you for saying that about the book.
Well, it really, obviously, really touched me, um, yeah, so I know, like, when I tell people go read it, like, go read it, really, or listen to it. It's on audiobook too. So either way, because I love the way you haven't said it yet in this interview. I love the only word where the Midwest real accent really comes out is challenge.
Ah,
The way you say I actually love I'm one of those, I like hard copies, but I enjoyed listening to the audiobook too. Because you even made the word challenge sound fun to me.
I love it.
How can people find the documentary?
Yeah, so it's out at drpatientmovie.com and you can rent it, buy it, share it, whatever you want to do there. And I hope it inspires you.
It has to, if you watch it, it will. Like it has to, that should come with a warning. Like it
Uh-huh.
definitely will inspire for sure. And I couldn't even pick like a one over there and then deep dive with the book. It's just an amazing combo. Um, so here comes the part where people, you're not gonna, you probably already have one off the top of your head, but listeners are trained. This is the part where I ask you for one step people can take today to support their health. It can be anything.
Stop pushing. I think now more than ever before, we're all overwhelmed, we're all overcommitted. And this year I decided 2024, I do not do overcommitment. I do not do overwhelm. And when you decide that, then just like our subconscious we were talking about. So I would just say so often we feel an internal like motivation might be, but also we have to perform up to someone else's standard. And I just want to give you permission today to just rest and enjoy life and to do what you love to do, but don't feel like you have to push.
Such wise advice. It's a bit, I actually was thinking of that when you were talking about your minions, right? That
Yes,
fighting and
exactly.
pushing and it's the allowing and the
Yes.
being is where the healing is. So
Mm.
such amazing advice. Dr. Jill, where for the people that listen like I do to podcasts and they're on the go and they're not going to click the show notes, where's the best place for them to find you?
If you just go to YouTube and click in my name, there's a channel, but really Spotify, any iTunes, it's all in all channels. The podcast is. Thank you.
Amazing. And Resiliency Radio is Dr. Jill's amazing podcast as well. I would highly recommend you check that out too. Thank you so much for all the gold you shared with us today.
You are welcome. What a true joy and to feel seen by you. Thank you for all the work that you do in the world and all the help that you give as well. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Yes.
you. For everyone listening, remember you can get those show notes and transcripts by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.